Impossible! That's what they called Alcatraz. America's toughest prison, surrounded by cold waters, was said to be escape-proof until June 11, 1962. 3 empty cells, 3 fake heads on pillows, 3 men who vanished into the night. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers did what everyone said couldn't be done, creating America's biggest prison mystery. Did they drown in those cold waters? Or did they trick the FBI and escape to freedom? This is the story of how simple items became tools for an amazing escape and why, after 60 years, the FBI still looks for these men. To understand why this escape shocked everyone, you need to know what made Alcatraz so escape-proof. Alcatraz Island sits in San Francisco Bay, just 1.25 miles from the city, about 20 football fields put end to end. But that short distance is very tricky. The water is among the most dangerous in America, with temperatures around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so cold that most people would get too cold and drown within 30 minutes. The currents move at 6 miles per hour, enough to pull even strong swimmers out to sea or drag them under the water. The prison itself was built to be the toughest in America. It opened as a federal prison in 1934, designed to hold the worst criminals in America, bank robbers, murderers, and prisoners who had tried to escape from other prisons. Alcatraz had concrete walls and steel bars stronger than any other prison. Armed guards in towers watched every move. There were regular counts of all prisoners, metal detectors to find hidden tools, and cells that were checked daily for any signs of tampering. The water all around acted as a natural barrier. The warden of Alcatraz used to say, "No one has ever escaped from Alcatraz, and no one ever will." People called it the Rock. Some called it Uncle Sam's Devil's Island. To the worst criminals in America, it was the place they feared most. Between 1934 and 1962, 36 men tried to escape in 14 different attempts. Most were caught quickly, some were shot, others drowned. Until June 1962, the prison's perfect record was unbroken. No one had ever made it out alive. This story centers on 3 special prisoners. Frank Morris was the smart leader. Born in 1926 in Washington, D.C., and left without parents at age 11, he spent most of his childhood in foster homes. Morris got into trouble many times while growing up. He was first arrested at age 13 and had been in and out of prisons ever since. With an IQ of 133, Morris was much smarter than average. He played the guitar, painted, and read lots of books. Prison officials called him a superior individual with superior intelligence who needs close supervision. Frank arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960 after escaping from a prison in Louisiana. Then there were the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. They grew up poor in Georgia with 11 brothers and sisters. As kids, they worked as farm helpers and became excellent swimmers, diving and swimming in the freezing waters of Lake Michigan during winter when their family went north for farm work. The brothers became bank robbers, getting caught after a string of small-town robberies. They arrived at Alcatraz in 1961. A 4th prisoner, Alan West, also helped plan the escape, but didn't make it out on the night of the breakout. These 4 men were held in cells right next to each other in Block B. From the moment they met, they began to talk in whispers about doing the impossible. The plan these men came up with was so clever, it seems more like something from a movie than real life. First, they had to find a way out of their cells. Each man was locked in a small cell that was just 5 feet by 9 feet, about the size of a bathroom. The cells had walls made of concrete that were several feet thick, with a small iron vent at the back. Guards checked these cells with a special tool called a sound meter that would detect any hollow spots in the walls or floor. They'd also run a metal bar along the cell bars several times a day, listening for any change in sound that might mean the bars had been sawed. Morris and the others knew they needed to create a hole in the back of their cells to access a utility corridor, a narrow passageway behind the cells where pipes and electrical wires ran. This corridor wasn't guarded or watched. But how could they dig through solid concrete without the guards noticing? This is where the escape plan gets really incredible. The men made their own tools using stuff you wouldn't believe could become tools. They got about 50 raincoats from other prisoners. By melting the raincoat material, they created a kind of homemade glue. They made drills using a broken vacuum cleaner motor and spoons stolen from the dining hall. They made a pump to inflate the raft they planned to build, using a musical instrument. They sharpened spoons from the cafeteria by rubbing them against the concrete floor until they became like small shovels and picks. After dinner each night, they would begin digging at the concrete around the air vents in the back of their cells. They worked only during the prison's music hour, when many inmates played instruments, creating enough noise to cover the sounds of their digging. Bit by bit, they chipped away at the concrete, making the holes bigger night after night. They hid their work by creating fake vents that they would place in the holes when they weren't working. They kept the concrete dust in paper bags and flushed small amounts down the toilet each time they used it so guards wouldn't notice. One of the cleverest parts of their plan was creating dummy heads to fool the guards during nighttime checks. The team collected real human hair from the prison barbershop floor. They stole paint from the prison art supplies. They made a kind of paste using soap, toilet paper, and toothpaste. Carefully, they shaped this mixture into heads that looked like them. They added the human hair and painted the faces to match their skin color. They even painted on stubble to make it look like they needed a shave. At night, they would place these dummy heads on their pillows. From the dim light of the night guard's flashlight, the dummies looked real enough to fool the guards making their rounds every hour. Frank Morris's dummy head was the best. It even had real hair from his own head glued onto it. Remember those 50 raincoats they collected? They weren't just for making glue. The team's most ambitious creation was a raft made entirely from raincoats. Using the homemade glue from melted raincoats, they carefully sealed together about 50 raincoats, creating a 6-foot by 14-foot raft. They even made life preservers and paddles from the same material. To seal the seams of the raft, they used heat from the steam pipes that ran through the utility corridor. They tested small sections to make sure their design would float and not leak. Working in secret after lights out, they stored their growing escape equipment on top of their cell block, where guards never checked. All of this work was done in almost complete darkness, using only the faint light that came in from distant prison lights. They worked for months, never knowing if all their effort would actually work when the time came. By June 1962, after more than a year of planning and work, they were ready. They chose the night of June 11th to make their escape. Each man had dug a hole about 10 inches wide through the back wall of his cell. Each had created a realistic dummy head to fool the guards. The plan was for all 4 men, Morris, both Anglin brothers, and Allen West, to slip through their cell wall holes after lights out at 9:30 p.m., get the raft and life vests from their hiding place, climb up through a ventilation shaft to the roof, slide down a kitchen pipe to the ground, and then sneak to the shore where they would inflate their raft and paddle away. At about 9:30 p.m. on June 11th, after the last count, they put their dummy heads in their beds and prepared to leave. The first problem came when Allen West couldn't get through his hole. The cement around his vent had hardened too much while he was away from his cell that day, and now the opening was too small. He worked frantically to make it bigger, but he couldn't break through in time. Morris and the Anglin brothers couldn't wait. They gathered their gear and moved through the utility corridor, up through an air vent, and onto the prison roof. Using 50 feet of cord made from bed sheets, they carefully lowered themselves down the bakery smoke pipe at the rear of the cell house. Once on the ground, they had to slip past the guard towers. A police report would later say their path to the water took them right under a tower where a guard was stationed. The thick fog that rolled in that night likely helped cover their movements. That same fog later prevented an immediate search when their escape was finally discovered. At the northeast shoreline, they inflated their makeshift raft and life preservers using the pump they had made. Then, in the dark of night, surrounded by swirling fog, they pushed off into the dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay. They were never seen again. The next morning, June 12, 1962, guards making their 7 a.m. head count noticed something odd about the 3 men in their cells. One of the guards looked in the cell and noticed something strange. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light or a shadow. After counting anyway, he flashed his light into the cell to see what was wrong with the figures on the pillows. When he took a closer look, he realized he was staring at a dummy head, not a sleeping prisoner. The alarm immediately sounded. All prisoners were ordered back to their cells for an emergency count. It was only then that the full escape was discovered. Guards rushed to search the entire island, but there was no sign of Morris or the Anglins. When they inspected the cells, they found the ingenious escape route through the utility corridor. On the prison roof, they discovered homemade tools and bits of rubber from the raincoat raft. At the island's shore, they found a rubber raincoat that had been turned into a paddle. By noon, FBI agents had arrived on the island. The largest manhunt in Bay Area history was underway. The FBI's search was massive. Every inch of the 22-acre island was searched multiple times. Coast Guard boats patrolled the bay. Police checked every report of suspicious men in the San Francisco area. All points bulletins went out to police nationwide. Wanted posters with the men's photos were distributed everywhere. Agents interviewed family members and friends who might help the escaped men. 2 days after the escape, a search boat found a wallet with family photos and addresses belonging to Clarence Anglin floating in the bay. Some believe this was left behind on purpose to make authorities think the men had drowned. The search turned up more clues. A homemade life preserver was found washed up on Angel Island, about 2 miles from Alcatraz. Some paddle-like pieces of wood were discovered near the Golden Gate Bridge. But of the men themselves, there was no trace. Alan West, who hadn't made it out of his cell in time, eventually told authorities everything about the escape plan. He became the main source of information about how they had planned and prepared for the breakout. Over the decades, clues have emerged suggesting the men might have survived. In 1975, a man claiming to be Frank Morris called a San Francisco reporter saying he would reveal his location for a pardon, immunity from prosecution, and $10,000. Nothing came of this call. The Anglin family has claimed they received Christmas cards signed by John and Clarence for several years after the escape. In the 1990s, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries reported that the 3 men had escaped to South America. In 2015, History Channel aired a documentary showing a photo supposedly showing John and Clarence Anglin in Brazil in 1975. A facial recognition expert said the photo had an 82% match with their prison photos. Perhaps most interesting is a letter received by the San Francisco Police Department in 2013. It read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely. Frank passed away in October 2005. His grave is in Argentina under another name. My brother died in 2011. The writer offered to return to the United States if he could receive medical treatment for his cancer and wouldn't be sent to prison for more than a year. The FBI tested the letter for fingerprints and DNA, but results were inconclusive. What makes this story so fascinating is just how detailed and clever the escape plan was. The men spent more than a year getting ready. They dug through their cell walls using those homemade tools, working only during music hour when the noise would cover their sounds. They created a secret workshop on the top of their cell block. They built the entire raft and tested pieces in the sink to make sure they would float. They made special tools for almost every part of their escape. A drill made from a broken vacuum cleaner motor. Wooden paddles strengthened with metal clips. A pump made from a musical instrument, 50 feet of rope made from twisted bed sheets. The night of the escape, they took dummy heads made from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair and placed them on their pillows. They climbed up an air vent pipe to the roof. From there, they used their rope to lower themselves down a kitchen vent pipe, climbed a fence, and made their way to the northeast shore. Then they launched their raincoat raft into the bay and disappeared into the darkness. It was a perfect storm. They had the right people, the right materials, and enough time to pull it off. The escape had huge consequences for Alcatraz prison. First, several guards lost their jobs or were disciplined for failing to detect the escape plan. The warden ordered improvements to security, including more bar checks and better supervision of inmate movements. But the biggest impact came the following year. In 1963, Attorney General Robert Kennedy ordered Alcatraz closed permanently. While the escape wasn't the only reason, it had clearly shown that the escape-proof prison wasn't so escape-proof after all. On March 21, 1963, the last prisoners were transferred off the island. The era of the Rock was over. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most visited tourist sites in San Francisco. Over 1 million people tour the abandoned prison each year, and many come specifically to see the cells where Morris and the Anglins pulled off their incredible escape. Visitors can see the actual cells, complete with the holes the men dug, and displays showing their homemade tools and dummy heads. To this day, the U.S. Marshals Service keeps the case open. The 3 men would now be in their 90s if still alive, but the investigation continues. The mystery of what happened to Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin remains one of America's greatest unsolved cases. The FBI's official conclusion was they drowned in the bay. The water was 54 degrees that night. They had to paddle against strong currents. Perhaps their raft leaked or capsized, and they were pulled under. Another possibility was that they reached Angel Island. The life vest found at Angel Island suggests they might have made it there. From there, they could have stolen a boat or been picked up by an accomplice. Some experts believe they could have landed north of the Golden Gate Bridge, where it would have been easier to disappear into the less populated areas, or they had an accomplice waiting in a boat. This would explain why they were never spotted on land. Others believe they reached land but then split up, making it harder for authorities to track them all. What really happened to the 3 men after they paddled away from the Rock? Did they make it? This question has fascinated people for over 60 years, and the answer is still a mystery. The story of the escape from Alcatraz reminds us of something powerful about humans. Our desire for freedom is so strong that we'll attempt even the impossible to achieve it. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers spent months planning, working in the dark, risking punishment, all for a chance to be free. Whether they survived or drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, they did something no one else had ever done before or has done since. They escaped from Alcatraz. Their story lives on not just because it's a mystery, but because it shows how determination and hope can overcome even the most difficult obstacles. If you are inspired by people overcoming impossible odds, make sure you are subscribed for our next First Achievers video.